I want to talk about design as a team sport and how a shared understanding can help teams who probably don't even need a leader, at least not as a formal role, become better and achieve their goals, nevertheless, although they don't have a leader. What a scandal. But first of all, let me say hello and tell you a little bit about myself and the company I work for. My name is Hias Wrba. It's a strange name, I know, but yeah, you know how it is. And I work as a UX mentor and managing director for UX and I, and we're a service provider helping our clients build awesome products by providing user experience, strategy, development, and visual design to them. And we do this in Berlin, Düsseldorf, and Munich. The headquarters is here in Düsseldorf, and I'm working for the Munich branch, so I'm sort of visiting the headquarters also these days, which is exciting, always. And I think this is enough for the fun part, because now I sadly have to tell you that I have two bad news for you. And the first bad news is not for me, I'm just a messenger. It's from a guy called Tom DeMarco. I don't know who of you knows him. He wrote a couple of books on project management and software development back in the 80s when there wasn't even stuff like Agile. And nevertheless, these books, they did stand the test of time, highly recommended. And he said one of the big misunderstandings a lot of people in our field of work have is that we're in the technology business. And he says, I'm sorry to tell you, you're not in the technology business. The guys working at NASA are in the technology business, or the guys coming up with new programming languages, they're in the technology business. You're actually in the communication business with what you're doing. So that's the first bad news. When you used to tell all your friends, oh, I work in technology, you probably don't. You work in communication. And the second bad news is, and this goes back to a German sociologist called Niklas Luhmann, is that communication is actually impossible. So we're trying to do it, but it's actually impossible to communicate with other people because it's so complicated. You have something in the back of your head, and then you try to verbalize it, and the other person has to hear it correctly, and then they interpret it, and it creates something in their head. And the chances that those two things in the heads are the same, I mean, what are the odds? So communication is probably not impossible, but it's pretty damn difficult to communicate. So how can we do this better, or why is this necessary at all? I think one of the big things underlying most of the work we do is that it is in this frame of reference. So we have these three dimensions in a way where most of the stuff happens. We have customers who we try to make happy, we have a business side that we try to keep alive and prospering, and we have a technology side that helps us to enable all of this. And usually there come requirements from all of these directions. We have user requirements, we have business requirements, we have technological requirements. And what happens in reality is that there's conflict because we have problems between these requirements. Something that's good for the business might not be that technologically viable, or it might not be something that our customers really want. And we say, oh, but we could make a lot of money if we did it like this. And they say, yeah, but we probably lose all our customers in the long term, and that's probably not that good for the business as well. So we have conflicts, and back in the old days, these conflicts were usually happening along silos in the company. So you had your technology guys and your business guys, and if you were lucky, you had your UX guys if you were really revolutionary, and they didn't like each other, and they were arguing all the time. And what came up recently is an idea to get these perspectives into a dialogue. And this is the idea of a product discovery team, or a triad, like Jeff Patton calls this, where you have representatives of all of these areas, where you have developers, you have somebody like a PO or a PM, and you have UX people, and they engage in a dialogue and represent these requirements, and by their dialogue and finding their agreement, create something that works from all three perspectives. And so what we need are teams. And one funny thing is, when you think about teams, or when you think about teams that require different skills and then read job ads, you're under the impression that most companies try to just find unicorns. When they identify that you need interfaces between different skill sets, like developers and visual designers and UX people, they put out an advert that says, okay, we want somebody that can do everything, because we don't need interfaces. So we're just going to hire 10 unicorns, put them in a team, and it's going to work. And I think what they miss is that they're called unicorns because they don't exist. And from my experience, they really don't exist. So people have their specialization. And that's why we need to get people to collaborate. And if you look at what the definition of a team is, this is from a book called The Wisdom of Teams. It's that it has a common purpose. It has performance goals it can be measured by. It has complementary skills, so it's not just unicorns, everybody can do everything. And it has mutual accountability, so it holds each other accountable for what they're doing. And what should stem from this, ideally, is a shared understanding of the undertaking of the team. This is a very nice visualization that especially drives home one of the nastiest points of a shared understanding, that the first picture says, I'm glad we all agree. Because the wicked thing is that from day one you think you have that shared understanding. And even if you go through your first cycle of communicating, you think, oh, now we get it. Now we're all on the same page. And you're probably not. You probably have to train again and again and again, and talk and communicate and question stuff and be very critical when working together to really reach a point where you have a shared understanding. And visualization, as also in the comic, helps to achieve that. So how do we create a team that perfect and that works that well? I'm not the first person to ask that question, and a pretty famous company asked themselves that question as well. Who's familiar with that article or the work behind it? Oh, nobody. It's good. Google did something very interesting. In 2015, they founded a small study group around one psychologist from Stanford, and it gave them the task to find out what makes teams across Google in all of their branches, in all of their fields of activity perform better than other teams. And it gave them access to all the data they needed. It gave them access to funds so they could travel, they could interview people, they could do whatever they liked. Their job was to find out what makes teams perform good, what makes teams perfect. And they did, funnily enough, approach this in a very Google way by just getting piles and piles of data and then crawling through them and trying to find patterns and trying to find out, okay, does anything correlate in any way that makes sense? And so they had some hypotheses, and some of you might know some of these, and some of you might even think some of them hold true, and they were all falsified. So one was, does it help to combine the best people? So if you have a team and you just put your best people across all the fields in this one team, will it perform better than a team with average people, or with a couple of good people and a couple of average people? The answer was no. So just good individual skills doesn't make a difference. Second question was this idea that people who are very similar work better together. So it's probably good to have just introverts in a team, or just extroverts in a team, or just people who like math in a team, or just people who don't like math and like language in a team. Also not true. It doesn't matter if the people are have a lot of similarities. And the third one, that's probably one of the most persistent myths in the startup world, is that people have to be friends away from work. So does it help anything if you go drinking and partying and you really like each other a lot and you're best friends? And no, doesn't matter at all. No correlation there. And they were almost a little frustrated and on the verge of giving up, and then they stumbled across work from a study group at MIT and Carnegie Mellon that did research on how collective intelligence emerges in groups. So they had these group intelligence tests, and they did groups perform in these, and they also tried to find factors. And what they found is that there's 3 big factors correlating for performance of groups in these collective intelligence tests. And the first one is every member speaks roughly the same proportion. So, and important, notice, it doesn't matter if they interrupt each other and if it's moderated or not, but the proportion of speech in the team should be halfway averaged. The second one was that you have a high social sensitivity of all members. So people are very aware of what's going on around them, especially in relation to people and their emotions. They're sensing when somebody is not in a good mood or when somebody is in a good mood, and they react to it and take this into account when they work with each other. And the third one, which was interestingly enough not included into Google's interpretation of the studies, is that groups perform better when they have a higher proportion of females in the group. Or my personal theory is that it's actually not gender, but it's diversity in general. So you need diverse groups and not groups that are very same-ish. And they boiled this down at Google to this model. It's on a website called Rework. And what they defined is the top priority for successful teams is something they called psychological safety. And it's the idea that in your team, it's safe to take a risk. My personal favorite example is, do I feel safe enough to ask what an abbreviation means when I'm in a meeting? You all know this. You're in a meeting, you're probably new to a project, new to a team, and somebody says, yeah, we're going to get the CDJ people on board to deal with the F and Y. And you don't know heck what any of this means. But you know that it's important for you. And the big question is, do I have the balls in that moment to say, sorry, the CD what people, who are they, what do they do? And risk making a fool of myself because everybody says, oh, he doesn't even know what the... So if you're in a team where you have psychological safety, you don't ask yourself these questions, you just take these risks because you know that nobody wants you any harm and that you're in a safe environment. And then Google derived some other stuff from that: dependability, structure and clarity, meaning and impact. So that's very cool. Psychological safety is important, and it probably boils down to something like trust, which was already mentioned. But I think Google oversaw a couple of things, and one of the things they oversaw is, and that's important if you want to translate any of these learnings into your own context, what are the factors in Google's environment itself that contribute to all of this? And I think one of the biggest has to do with these 2 guys. These are 2 American psychologists, Edward Deci and Richard Ryan. And they became very, very famous for coming up with a concept called intrinsic motivation. You probably have heard of that. And it's the idea that people can be motivated in 2 different ways. Either extrinsically, that means from outside factors. That's stuff like money or fame or safety or all of that stuff from the outside. That's stuff you can gamify. If your company gamifies behavior of their customers, that's an extrinsic motivation. You say, oh, you're going to get a badge if you use our product a lot. So that's cool, you give them badges, they love that. But the big problem with extrinsic motivation is the second you take away the extrinsic factor, the second you take away the money, you take away the badges, you take away the security, or you take away the fame, the people will stop doing what you had them doing when you gave them the badges. So that's a problem. You actually want, when people work for you or buy your products, actually you want them to be intrinsically motivated to do that. And Ryan and Deci identify 3 big factors for intrinsic motivation. And one of them is autonomy. The second is, so autonomy is the idea how much I am in control of my own life. It's not I can do what I want, I don't care what anybody thinks, but it's how much do I feel in control of my life. Relatedness, how much do I feel related to the people around me? And competence, how much do I experience competence when I'm doing that? And these are the things that really motivate people to work. And today I want to focus on autonomy because I think that's one of the key ones. And Google is famous for giving their teams a lot of autonomy. They don't set any rules at all. They say to their teams, you can do it whichever way you like. If you want to do waterfall, you can do waterfall. If you want to do Kanban, if you want to do Scrum, we don't care. You know what your job is, you know your goals. Do it whichever you see fit. There's this old saying in Agile, let the team decide. And I think that's one of the most powerful thoughts. Let the people who have to do the work decide. And that's what I want to reflect on a little bit. Because I think these intrinsically motivating factors are not only relevant for individual people, but also for teams. So you want an environment where teams for themselves can decide what to do. And why that is important has also to do with psychology and with the way that we solve problems. And if you look at problem-solving theory, you have usually models like these. This is by a German guy called Dietrich Dörner, very German name. He came up with this in the 70s, and he says, when we're solving problems, yeah, time? Oh, time. We're not even halfway through. This is by a guy called Dietrich Dörner, and he said, when we're solving problems, we have a current state, so a situation that we can observe. We have means, and we have a desired state. So, and if everything is pretty straightforward, the current state is known to us, the desired state as well. In this case, my desired state is that the thing for the means shows up there, and I know what the means are pressing this button. So, very easy. We know it's pretty straightforward. We know where we are. We know what we want. We know how to get there. This happens a lot in craftsmanship, for example. When somebody who's a good carpenter is told, I need a table, and it's supposed to look like this, this, and this. If he has all the tools, if he has the proper wood, he knows how to get there. It's easy. And that's what's called a tame problem in psychology. It gets a little bit more complicated if any of these are unknown. So if I know where I am and I know where to go, but I don't exactly know how to get there, and the means are unknown, it's a complex problem. Or if I don't know where it is actually I'm going and where I want to be, I have a rough idea, but I'm not that sure. That's also a complex problem. In any of these imaginable combinations, there's some are complex problems. And then there's something that's even more nasty, and that's what Horst Rittel calls a wicked problem. And that is, I don't know where I am, I don't know where I want to go, and hell do I know how to get there. And I think that's actually the circumstance that we're working on most of the time. So we have usually a very fluid situation. The status quo is changing all the time, also from external factors. Markets are changing very fast. We have unclear goals, and we have to come up with our means along the way that we take, which is basically the definition of programming. So how do we do this? And that's the great and big idea about Agile. Agile is often sold as something that speeds up your process. It actually doesn't. It slows it down. And it slows it down by taking smaller steps. Back in the waterfall world, you would take one giant design step, and you would then take one giant development step and one giant testing step, and after each step you're thinking, it's never going to work, god damn it, but yeah, well, we're in this process, we have to do it. We have change requests. Well, not that good. So you take a small step. But if you don't know your desired outcome, after that initial step, you have a lot of possibilities. How do you know which one to take? If you have no idea, you would have to say all of these are weighed the same. You can't decide. Is this one the right one? Is the other one the right one? You can't know. And this is where visions come into play. And product visions you come up with your team and agree on with stakeholders. Because they start giving you a rough idea of where you want to go. You don't have to narrow down your desired state to the last bit and to the last detail. That's waterfall thinking, but you have to get a rough idea and a shared understanding around this. You have to create what people like Marty Kagan call a true north. And then you can take your next little step and observe, okay, where did that get us? And your next little step and your next little step, and so on and so on and so on. And step by step, you can get to your goal. So one of my theses is that teams need a shared vision. And to make this not too theoretical, but to give you something to take away into your actual work, here are some visioning techniques that worked for us pretty well. One of them, I really fell in love with this one. It's never failed me, and it's so great. It's by Marty Kagan, and it's the idea that you write at the start of a product development process a letter from a customer in the future that thanks the company for the product. And we're talking about an actual letter. We're not talking about an angry tweet or something or an email, you guys are cool, I like your product. An actual letter. Somebody sits down, grabs a pen, grabs a piece of paper, puts a stamp on it, you remember what stamps are, and writes you a letter. That's a big investment, and that demands a great product. That demands a lot of desire and a lot of excitement when using it. So, and it's really nice what usually comes out of this when you let teams write their letters at the beginning. One technique to narrow this down is if you work with something like personas, you can give them a quote. I love product X because, or product X changed my life because it's now so much easier to do X, Y, Z. Another very formal, in a way almost tried and true way, are vision templates, stuff like the elevator pitch or stuff like this one where you have a very formalized template and you just fill it up with the information that you're missing. So who am I doing this for? What goals do they try to achieve? With what activities? What problems do they face at the moment? What's their USP? Stuff like that. And last but not least, one more step towards development is story maps are also a great, great, great technique to gain shared understanding in the team around what it is that we actually want to build. And that's it. I think that was pretty much on point. Yes.
Where can we hear the rest of the presentation? There were like 2 more things.
There's a longer version on SlideShare, actually. And I'll Twitter the link with the product tank hashtag, and then, yeah, that's the extended version with relatedness and competency as well.
Thanks.
Would you rather suggest to have a designer who is a part of the product team or a separate unit which serves the needs of other product teams?
If you can afford it, always a designer who's part of the team. Always. Because I think the dialogue, because I think design as an activity is something that should be done as a team and not by a single person. There's parts of design where you really need to get down into the details and work on individual interactions and stuff like that, and where it feels very craftsmanshipy. But especially when you start out, when it's about broad ideas and big strokes, it's very important to do this by communicating, I think, and to do this with the team and as a part of the team, not as somebody from the outside who has... Because as a designer, that's why I don't like this whole design leadership movement, because design in itself is a lot of power. And I think it's a lot nicer to spread this power and make everybody feel that they can contribute to the design in a meaningful way, instead of just saying, okay, I'm the genius designer, I tell you how to do it.
I have a second question as well.
Yeah, sure.
How would you suggest to deal with the teams which work on internal products and they don't have dedicated design resources? So basically there is no design.
I mean, one possible solution could be to, at least to alleviate it in the mid and long term, to come up with something like a company design system, where you have like a toolkit that people can take parts from and work with that, just to get it on a new level. And then I would probably try to get outside help that tries to transfer a lot of knowledge to the team. So to at least give them the means to get the basics right.
At the beginning, you showed the 3 parts: technology, business, and the UX. And you said it's a dialogue, it's a solution. Is that the final? Like, do you still speak up for the dividing it in 3 parts, or is there a hierarchy? Or is that
I would hope that it's a hierarchy in the way that companies like Envision focus on value for the customer. So if it has to be a hierarchy, none of the internal roles should be at the top of that, but the customer should be, and his or her value should be at the top of that hierarchy, I would say. But otherwise, I'd say it's a dialogue on eye level between these 3 interests, I would say.
but they're still quite separated? So
No. They're one team. They work in one team and work together on the solution. It's not about. I think it's and by working together, they, I think, develop over time an understanding for the other's perspective. And they, when you start out, it's often very separated, but over time, it glues more and more together into one common vision of what you're trying to build and what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Hias.
Thank you.